I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are lying perfectly still on this freezing cold, undeniably inorganic operating table.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's already an uncomfortable place to put yourself mentally.
Right, but it gets worse. You are wide awake.
Oh, no.
Yeah, perfectly lucid. The bright, harsh surgical lights are just glaring right into your eyes,
Hmm.
and you are actively watching, or at least, fully hyper-consciously aware, as a surgeon takes a steel scalpel, presses it into your hand, and begins to slice into your ring finger.
It's just a profoundly unsettling image. I mean,
No.
normally, when we envision ourselves going in for surgery, we think of the countdown, right?
Right, the whole count backwards from 10 thing.
Exactly. The anesthesiologist says, count backward, and you get to maybe 8 or 7, and then boom, the world goes comfortably dark.
You're just out.
You're out. You wake up in a recovery room, groggy, disoriented, but you've completely skipped over the actual traumatic event.
Yeah, you essentially time travel. The trauma happens while you just aren't there to experience it.
Precisely.
But today, we are diving into a stack of source material that completely shatters that comforting illusion.
It really does.
We're looking at this deeply introspective breakdown of a medical experience that sounds, on paper, incredibly mundane. It's just a relatively minor surgical procedure on a single ring finger.
Right, a routine thing.
But the catch is that this procedure was performed entirely under local anesthesia.
Meaning the patient was awake, conscious, and cognitively processing every single second of the operation.
A second of it.
And what makes this source material so compelling to me is that this minor physical intervention didn't just, fix a biological issue with a finger.
No, it sparked a whole...
Yeah, it served as a catalyst for a massive, almost overwhelming existential awakening about the systems we blindly trust and the ways our own minds can kind of turn against us when we're cornered.
And that is exactly what we are unpacking today. I mean, our mission for this deep dive is not to give you a medical lesson on how to operate on a hand.
Definitely not.
We're going to use this incredibly vivid, deeply uncomfortable experience to crack open the hidden power dynamics of hospitals.
Which are fascinating.
They really are. We're going to explore the raw, unfiltered psychology of human vulnerability when you are completely trapped. And eventually, we are going to navigate our way toward this really radical, highly controversial rethinking of what it actually means to give up on something.
It's a journey that challenges so many of our fundamental socially conditioned assumptions.
Yes.
Assumptions about how healing works,
Yeah.
the hidden psychological burdens carried by the people who care for us, and the lies we tell ourselves about how we process permanent loss.
So whether you're currently dreading an upcoming doctor's appointment and you want a strategic advantage, or maybe you're trying to figure out how to genuinely support a friend who is navigating a chronic illness.
Or you're just intensely curious about how the human brain behaves when it's shoved into an extreme pressure cooker.
Exactly. This deep dive is going to offer you a completely new lens. You're going to look at the medical world and your own mind really in a way you probably haven't before.
And it's a world every single one of us will eventually have to interact with.
100%.
Yet we rarely stop to analyze the environment of hospital or the psychology of it until we're suddenly the ones wearing the paper gown.
Yeah, completely at the mercy of strangers. You don't think about the cage until the door locks behind you.
That's a great way to put it.
So let's put you right there on that operating table. The lights are blinding. The room smells like, iodine and bleach.
Very sterile.
Very sterile. And the local anesthesia has been administered into the ring finger. Now, the source text spends a lot of time on this specific moment, noting that the actual injection of the anesthesia was brutally, blindingly painful.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah, this tiny needle in a small, highly innervated area sent a shockwave of severe pain and this full-body tension through the patient.
Right, because the hands are so sensitive.
Exactly. But here is the bizarre part. Once the finger was completely numb, the psychological dread of the blade entering the body felt infinitely heavier and honestly harder to bear than the sharp physical agony of the needle.
Which forces us to look at this really crucial distinction between physical sensation and psychological trauma.
Right.
When you are put under general anesthesia, you are surrendering your consciousness entirely. Your brain is shut down.
We're off the clock.
You're off the clock.
Yeah.
But under local anesthesia, you are trapped in this weird cognitive paradox. Your consciousness is fully active, your mind is racing, but a crucial part of your physical autonomy, your ability to feel and protect a part of your own body, is hijacked.
Yeah.
So you're physically numb, but psychologically you're hyper-aware.
I keep coming back to this analogy in my head, right? Imagine being put into a sensory deprivation tank.
Okay, yeah.
Now, usually you go into one of those tanks to calm down. The water is body temperature, it's pitch black, it's silent. All physical input is erased, so your mind relaxes.
Right, it's supposed to be peaceful.
But local anesthesia is like a corrupted version of that tank. The physical sensation of the finger is erased, yes, but instead of relaxing, one very specific psychological sensation, just pure, unadulterated vulnerability, is dialed up to an unbearable, deafening roar.
Yes.
Why does that happen? I mean, why does a brain that can't feel pain suddenly panic twice as hard just knowing the blade is there?
To understand that, we have to look at the evolutionary mechanics of the human brain. Over millions of years, our brains have been hardwired to associate physical tissue damage with an immediate lethal threat to our survival.
Right, pain is the alarm system.
Exactly. Pain is the mechanism. It's the evolutionary alarm bell that says, move your hand away from the fire or, run from the predator.
It's a protective reflex.
Precisely. But when you introduce local anesthesia, you are artificially silencing the alarm bell while the threat is still actively occurring.
Oh, wow.
And the brain doesn't just cheerfully accept this, right? It relies on its higher cognitive functions. It knows that structural damage is happening.
Because you can see it or you know it's happening.
Exactly. It knows, logically, that a sharp metal object is slicing into its own flesh and blood.
Yeah.
So deprived of the physical pain signal it usually uses to gauge the severity of the threat, the brain compensates.
It freaks out.
It overcorrects. It ramps up the existential alarm system. It triggers this massive release of stress hormones because it calculates that if damage is happening and we can't feel it, we are in the ultimate state of helplessness.
Wow. It's like the brain is sitting in a control room, right, looking at the security cameras, seeing the building on fire, but the actual fire alarm has been snipped.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
So the brain just starts screaming, I can't feel the heat, but the smoke is everywhere. Prepare for the worst.
Exactly. And this neurological overcorrection leads directly to a profound state of existential drift. While lying there on this cold table, staring at the ceiling tiles, the source describes this sudden, intrusive thought hitting them.
Yeah, the thought was, what if today is my last day?
Right. Over a ring finger surgery.
It's wild. The leap from my finger is numb to I might be dying today is just staggering.
Objectively, yes. It is not a life-threatening procedure. The mortality rate for minor extremity surgery is infinitesimally small.
Basically zero.
Basically zero. But the environment dictates the psychology. You are in a sterile room, the lights are abrasive, there is an absolute lack of warmth, comfort, or familiarity.
Just cold metal and strangers.
Right, you're surrounded by masked strangers. This environment forces a visceral confrontation with mortality. It strips away all the comforting illusions of your daily life and leaves you with the bare biological reality of your own fragility.
Which leads to this really intense realization in the text about the sheer bleakness of dying in a room like that.
Yes, that part was heavy.
You suddenly understand, not as a poetic concept, but in your bones, why people so desperately wish to pass away at home.
Surrounded by familiar things.
Exactly. Surrounded by the smell of their own living room, the sound of their family, the texture of their own blankets, a hospital is a machine designed for fixing biological material. It is explicitly not a sanctuary for the human soul.
It is an environment optimized for efficiency, sanitation, and clinical intervention, all of which are totally antithetical to emotional comfort.
Yeah, there's no coziness in an OR.
None. And because the mind is spinning out in this hyper-vulnerable, sterile vacuum, it starts searching for context. It starts trying to anchor itself.
And this is where the thought process gets incredibly intense. The mind, searching for an anchor, suddenly jumps to history.
Right, the historical empathy.
Yeah. Lying on that table, perfectly conscious but physical paralyzed in one area, there is this overwhelming, crashing wave of empathy for historical figures. People who were tortured or executed or subjected to brutal ancient surgeries while completely inescapably awake.
Think about the magnitude of that realization.
Yeah.
We read about historical torture or pre-anesthesia battlefield amputations in textbooks, and it remains abstract.
Yeah, it's just a story.
We can't truly feel it. But when you are lying on a modern surgical table, feeling the tug and pull of your own flesh being manipulated without your consent, even if it doesn't hurt the abstract, becomes terrifyingly real.
You're suddenly living a tiny fraction of it.
Exactly. The realization hits that the fear and the psychological agony those historical people experienced must have been incomprehensibly larger, like a black hole compared to a grain of sand, than what is happening in this modern hospital.
It's like this intense blast of historical perspective injected straight into your veins. You're lying there terrified of a scalpel you can't even feel, and you suddenly realize, wait, hundreds of years ago, people felt the blade and the saw and the fire, and they had absolutely no way to escape it.
It forces this overwhelming sense of gratitude for modern medical technology.
Oh, for sure. Just the sheer miracle that we can artificially numb the body, even if the psychological weight is crushing.
But that psychological weight doesn't just vanish because you're grateful. This state of hyper-awareness where you are simultaneously pondering historical torture, the bleakness of a sterile death, and the fragility of your own biology, it acts like an amplifier.
It dials everything up to 11.
It doesn't just blow up your internal existential fears. It makes you terrifyingly, almost supernaturally sensitive to your immediate environment.
Right.
When your psychological defenses are that stripped down, your brain turns into a radar dish, just scanning for any tiny clue, any micro-signal about your safety.
Which brings us to the most critical variable in that room. The person actually holding the sharp piece of metal.
The surgeon.
The surgeon. Because if you are lying there, completely immobilized and vulnerable, the most important entity in the universe at that exact fraction of a second is the person deciding where the blade goes.
Exactly. The entirety of your future well-being is condensed into the hands of one stranger. And the text notes a very specific, incredibly chilling moment during the procedure.
This part stressed me out.
It's so relatable, though. In the dead, clinical silence of the operating room, where the only sound is the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the doctor lets out a small, almost imperceptible sigh.
A sigh. A tiny exhale of breath. I mean, in any other context, a sigh means someone is bored or tired or maybe just stretching their lungs.
But context is everything. Furthermore, it's noted that the doctor starts speaking in a careless, somewhat rough, hurried manner to the assisting staff.
Oh, man.
Now, put yourself back in that hypervigilant radar state. Because you are conscious, because you are artificially numb and existentially terrified, this tiny everyday sigh and this slightly rough tone don't just register as fatigue.
No, they trigger a massive, catastrophic wave of internal anxiety. The internal monologue just explodes.
What are you thinking in that moment?
You're thinking, why did they sigh? Did they cut the wrong tendon? Is the tissue damaged? Are they annoyed because this is harder than they thought? Am I going to lose my finger?
The brain takes a micro-expression and spins it into a worst-case survival scenario. And the true horror of it is the absolute paralysis of your position.
This is the peak of helplessness. Let's compare it to something relatable, right?
Sure.
If you take your car to a mechanic and you're standing there while they look under the hood and the mechanic suddenly lets out a deep sigh and shakes their head.
You ask them what's wrong.
Right. You immediately speak up. You say, hey, what's wrong? Is the transmission totally shot? How much is this going to cost? You can demand answers. You can even say, you know what, put the hood down. I'm taking my car somewhere else.
You have agency.
You have total agency. But on the operating table, with your flesh sliced open and clamped back, you cannot speak up.
No, you'd be terrified to move or make a sound.
Exactly. You cannot ask, hey, doc, why the sigh? Because you are terrified of distracting them. You cannot adjust your attitude or assert your dominance. You just have to surrender your physical body, stare at the lights, and wait.
It is the ultimate, undeniable asymmetry of power. The doctor is in complete unilateral control of your physical integrity, and you are entirely at their mercy. Your agency is zero. Their agency is absolute.
And this realization of complete powerlessness is what leads to a highly strategic and frankly somewhat cynical approach to navigating the medical system once the surgery is over.
Right, the post-op strategy.
Let's get into this because this part really challenged me. The strategy presented in the text is the absolute necessity of, and this is a direct quote, lifting up the doctor.
Managing their ego.
Managing their ego. And I have to be honest, when I read this, every instinct in my body bristled.
Oh, I'm sure.
My immediate reaction was, absolutely not. I am the patient. I am the one suffering. I am literally paying them, or my insurance is paying them thousands of dollars to provide a service.
You feel like the customer?
Exactly. If I go to a restaurant and the chef is grumpy, I don't go into the kitchen and tell him how handsome and brilliant he is just so he doesn't spit in my food. Why should I have to stroke the ego of a highly compensated professional while I'm the one bleeding?
That is the natural, indignant response of someone accustomed to a consumer-driven society where the customer is always right.
Right. It feels unfair.
But we have to look at the psychological reality of a hospital ecosystem. The strategy of lifting up the doctor is explicitly not about mindless subservience. It is not about throwing away your dignity to suck up to someone.
Then what is it?
It's a calculated defensive maneuver designed to optimize your biological outcome.
Okay, defend this maneuver for me. Why is managing a surgeon's ego a necessary defense tactic?
Because underneath the scrubs in the medical degree, doctors are entirely human. They are subject to the same cognitive biases, emotional exhaustion, bad days, and ego fragility as anyone else.
Fair enough.
But unlike a chef or a mechanic, a doctor's subconscious biases can literally alter the trajectory of your physical healing.
That's terrifying.
If a doctor finds you abrasive, difficult, or ungrateful, it can subtly or sometimes overtly impact the quality of the aftercare you receive. They might spend 30 seconds less in your room during rounds.
Wow, yeah.
They might be slightly less aggressive in investigating a vague symptom you report. They might dismiss your pain levels as complaining rather than a genuine complication.
So you're saying that swallowing your pride and being deferential isn't a sign of weakness. It is a literal medical intervention that you are performing on yourself.
Exactly.
You are treating the doctor's mood as a variable in your own recovery equation.
That's the perfect way to phrase it. You are managing the external environment to facilitate your internal healing. If buttering up the surgeon means they take your post-op pain more seriously, then buttering up the surgeon is medically necessary.
It's a survival tactic.
It's a survival tactic in an imbalanced power dynamic.
That is incredibly bleak, honestly, but it makes total logical sense. And this power dynamic doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? There is a deeply ingrained sociological reason why doctors require this kind of management, especially in large hospital settings.
Yes. The hospital hierarchy is one of the most rigid class structures remaining in modern society. Doctors sit at the absolute uncontested peak of that credentialed world.
They're at the top of the pyramid.
Exactly. In the cultural context of this source material, which originated from Japan, doctors are constantly, ubiquitously referred to as sensei.
Right.
It's a title imbued with deep respect, authority, and deference.
Now, think about the psychological impact of that. If you wake up every day, walk into a building, and every single person you interact with, patients, nurses, administrators, calls you sensei, defers to your judgment, and literally puts their lives in your hands. That has to warp your reality, right?
Absolutely.
The human ego isn't built to sustain that level of constant veneration without mutating.
It almost inevitably mutates. The observation made here is that some doctors, marinated in this environment of absolute authority, develop what is referred to as a tengu complex.
A tengu, explain that for us.
So in Japanese folklore, a tengu is a mythical creature. They're often depicted as a bird-like demon or a mountain goblin, and they're known for being excessively boastful, arrogant, and easily offended.
Okay, kind of like an arrogant spirit.
Right. And visually, they're almost always depicted with an unnaturally long, prominent nose.
Oh, I see. Like Pinocchio, but instead of growing when you lie, the nose grows from sheer pride and arrogance.
Exactly. To become a tengu is a cultural shorthand for someone whose ego has inflated to the point of structural arrogance. They look down on everyone else.
That makes sense.
The observation is that in a hospital, you will frequently see these tengu doctors acting appallingly toward the nursing staff, speaking down to them, dismissing their observations, essentially weaponizing their position at the top of the hierarchy to bully those below them.
And if they treat the nurses, their own colleagues, like that, imagine how they view a vulnerable patient who dares to ask a questioning them.
It's a bad dynamic.
But here is the sharpest, most brutal observation about these arrogant doctors in the text. It points out a harsh reality check. A lot of these deeply unpleasant, abrasive doctors remain trapped as permanent hospital employees.
Yes.
Not because they love the institution, but because they fundamentally lack the basic interpersonal humanity, the charisma or the baseline empathy required to successfully open and sustain their own private practice.
It is a fascinating economic and social critique. To run a private practice, you cannot just be a skilled technician. You have to be a decent enough human being that patients actually choose to return to you.
Right, you need bedside manner.
You have to build trust. You have to operate in a free market of care.
Exactly. If a private practice doctor sighs and acts like a jerk, I just find a new doctor on Yelp. The market punishes arrogance.
Yes, it corrects itself.
But in a massive, sprawling hospital system, you don't need bedside manner. You just need to be a cog in the machine. A highly specialized, potentially very abrasive cog, but a cog nonetheless.
The hospital absorbs the patients by virtue of its sheer size, its emergency room, and its specialized equipment. The arrogant doctor is completely insulated from the market consequences of their terrible personality.
The institution shields them, which leaves the patient in a highly precarious position. If the individual personality of the doctor is a dangerous wild card that can dictate your healing, and the hospital shields the bad ones, how do you protect yourself before you even walk through the doors?
How do you evaluate where to entrust your body?
Right. Well, this forces us to look at how we make decisions in the modern era. We turn to the modern oracle for everything,
Online reviews.
specifically analyzing Google Maps reviews for hospitals.
It sounds absurd at first glance. We use Google Maps to find a good slice of pizza, and we are using the exact same interface to decide where to have open heart surgery.
Let's really dig into this, because reading hospital reviews is a wild psychological experiment. The premise acknowledges that, yes, there are fake reviews, hospitals have PR departments, they probably try to artificially inflate their scores.
Sure.
But the argument is that if you know how to sift through the noise, there is profound hidden truth in that data. Crucially, there is a very clear, counterintuitive statistical trend. The larger and more comprehensive a hospital is, the lower its overall star rating tends to be.
Which, on the surface, seems paradoxical. You would assume the massive, heavily funded mega hospital with the robotic surgery wings would have the highest ratings.
You would.
But it suffers from a classic problem of scale and demographic expectation.
But wait, I have to draw a massive contrast here before we just accept that data. Think about the fundamental difference between reviewing a restaurant and reviewing a hospital.
Okay, lay it out.
If I go to a highly rated Italian restaurant and my pasta is overcooked and the waiter forgets my drink, I might leave a grumpy 3-star review. Food was mediocre, service was slow, wouldn't go back. The stakes are a ruined Friday night.
Right. Annoying, but not life-altering.
Exactly. But if I go to a hospital and a doctor is dismissive or a nurse forgets my pain medication, I don't just feel annoyed. I feel like my fundamental safety, my very life has been threatened. The emotional charge is nuclear.
The stakes are quite literally incomparable. You are operating at the absolute base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs survival.
Exactly. So how can we possibly trust an objective 5-star mathematical metric to measure something so intensely subjective, terrifying, and highly charged?
It's tricky.
Because a 1-star review for a hospital could be from someone whose spouse died due to legitimate, horrific medical malpractice. Or that exact same 1-star review could be from someone who was just highly anxious, waited an hour in the ER with a sprained ankle, and felt the triage nurse didn't make enough eye contact.
Yes.
They both leave 1 star. How is that data useful?
You've zeroed in on exactly the analytical framework required to decode these reviews. The reason larger hospitals naturally trend downward in their scores is because they serve a massive, completely unfiltered cross-section of humanity.
Right.
You have every demographic, every socioeconomic class, every possible cultural background colliding in one waiting room. And every single one of those people has wildly different, deeply ingrained expectations of what good care looks like.
To one person, good care means the doctor sits and holds their hand for 20 minutes. To another, good care means the doctor gets in, diagnoses the problem in 30 seconds, and gets them out the door.
Precisely. When you have that kind of volume and that much diversity in expectations, the statistical average is inevitably dragged down. You mathematically cannot please everyone when pleasing them involves navigating their physical pain and existential terror.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, people rarely go out of their way to log on to Google Maps to leave a review when a hospital visit goes exactly as expected. If you go in for a routine scan, get the scan and leave. You don't write a review.
No, the baseline expectation is survival. You don't applaud an airplane for landing, you expect it to land.
Exactly. People are motivated to write a review by extreme emotional variance. They review when a doctor performs a miracle and saves their child's life, generating a euphoric 5-star review. Or, much more frequently, they write a review when they are terrified, grieving, in agonizing pain, or feeling deeply disrespected.
So hospital reviews are an emotional lightning rod, a venting mechanism for trauma, not a clinical assessment of medical competence.
Yes. So the star rating is basically a measure of how many people felt emotionally validated versus emotionally discarded. But even with all that noise, the strategy suggests there is a threshold where the noise becomes a signal, a heuristic for danger.
Yes. The observation is that a 3.5-star average for a massive regional hospital is totally normal. It just means they are busy and expectations clash. But when a hospital's aggregate rating starts approaching 2 stars, that is a universal, undeniable red flag.
Because at that point, you can't just blame differing expectations anymore.
Right. At 2 stars, the sheer volume of negative traumatic experiences has transcended statistical variance. It points to deeply rooted systemic failures in management, chronic understaffing, or a toxic institutional culture that is bleeding over into patient care.
The law of large numbers takes over.
Exactly. So it's less about finding a perfect hospital and more about identifying the threshold of institutional disaster. And the advice for actually reading these reviews is fascinating. You can't just read the text. You have to play psychological detective.
You really do.
You have to actively imagine the background circumstances of the person typing the review.
You have to read between the lines of their anger. Was this a one-star review written from the emergency room waiting area at 2 a.m. on a Saturday?
Right.
Because if so, of course they waited 4 hours. That's triage, not necessarily bad medicine. Or was it a review from a patient with a complex chronic illness who feels their specialist consistently ignored their charted symptoms over 6 months? The latter is a much more serious indictment of the hospital's culture.
Okay, I love the detective work aspect. But let's ground this in a very harsh reality. What happens when you do all this research, you play detective, you realize the local hospital has a 2.1-star rating and sounds like an absolute nightmare?
But it's your only option.
Yes, it is the only hospital in your rural area, or it's the only one your insurance covers. You have a medical emergency and you must go there. Your options are zero. What then?
This is a scenario millions of people face, and it is exactly what the individual in our source material experienced. They had to utilize a poorly rated facility out of sheer necessity. And the actionable advice derived from this is paramount. If you must enter a compromised medical environment, you have to arm yourself.
Arm yourself. I really want to pause on that specific phrasing. Arm yourself. You don't use that phrase when you're going to a place of healing. You use that phrase when you're walking into a battlefield.
Because psychologically, that is exactly what it is. You are entering a hostile environment where your well-being is not guaranteed by the system. The advice is that you can no longer afford to be a passive recipient of healthcare.
You can't just trust the process.
No, you cannot just lie back in the bed and assume that doctors and nurses will seamlessly handle everything. You have to become the aggressive project manager of your own physical body.
How does that look in practice?
It means keeping meticulous, aggressive records. If you feel a minor discomfort, you document it. You track the exact time your pain spikes. You note exactly when the nurse administered your medication.
You become your own chart.
Exactly. When the doctor finally appears for their 3-minute round, you do not use vague language like "I feel crummy." You actively, accurately, and concisely communicate data. You manage the flow of information because you assume the system will lose it.
It also loops back perfectly to the strategy of lifting up the doctor we talked about earlier. Part of arming yourself is consciously appealing to the doctor's humanity.
Yes.
You manage their ego, yes, but you're also desperately trying to humanize yourself. You crack a joke, you ask them how their shift is going, you are deploying psychological tactics so that when they look at you, they don't just see bed 4, inflamed appendix.
They see a human being.
Right. You are trying to trigger their conscience so they don't let you slip through the cracks of a broken 2-star system.
It is incredibly exhausting work. Being sick takes all your energy, and now you have to expend cognitive energy managing the people trying to heal you. But when you are in a vulnerable position in a flawed institution, hypervigilance is your only true defense.
So let's map the journey so far. You've survived the terror of local anesthesia. You've navigated the chaotic, emotionally charged world of online reviews. You've successfully managed the fragile ego of the Tengu doctor.
You're doing great.
You might logically think, okay, the surgery is done, the worst is over, now I just heal. But according to this exploration, the most insidious, psychologically taxing part of the entire ordeal is just beginning. The true test of human endurance isn't the blade. It is the inpatient lifestyle.
The recovery period inside the walls of the hospital. The environment is described in the text with a very specific, heavy word: suffocating.
And it makes perfect sense when you break down the mechanics of a hospital ward. It is a rigid, immovable, heavily bureaucratized machine. Every single aspect of your biological existence is suddenly outsourced to a schedule that you do not control.
You are stripped entirely of your autonomy. Think about how you regulate stress in your normal daily life. Autonomy is your primary tool.
Oh, absolutely.
If you feel overwhelmed, you take a walk. If you're tired at 2 p.m., you take a nap. If you want to eat dinner at midnight, you do. These micro-choices are how we maintain our psychological equilibrium.
And in a hospital.
In a hospital, every single one of those choices is confiscated for the sake of medical efficiency.
Right. You don't sleep when you're tired. You sleep when the ward turns the lights out. You are woken up at 4:30 a.m., not because you are rested, but because the nursing shift needs to record your temperature and blood pressure before the doctors arrive.
Your schedules are not your own.
Your meals arrive on a plastic tray at 5:80 p.m. regardless of your appetite. It is a total institutionalization of your body.
The comparison made to illustrate this is brilliant. The text compares the inpatient hospital experience to the psychological difference between living in a densely packed apartment building versus living in a detached single-family house.
I love this analogy. Let's pull it apart, because anyone who has lived in a cheap apartment knows this exact feeling.
In an apartment building, you are fundamentally aware at all times that you are part of a shared, tightly controlled infrastructure. You share the walls. You can hear the plumbing groan when your neighbor showers. You hear footsteps above you.
Yeah, you're never truly alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are governed by the strict rules of the landlord or the building manager. You cannot play music loud. You cannot change the locks. You are a tenant in a machine.
But in a detached house, you are the sovereign ruler of your environment. You dictate the rhythm, the volume, the schedule. The hospital, then, is the ultimate extreme version of an apartment complex. But it's worse, because the landlord, the medical staff, has the universal right and the medical obligation to walk into your bedroom at 3 a.m., flip on the fluorescent lights, and stick a needle in your arm.
You have absolutely zero expectation of privacy or spatial control. And to cope with this deep confinement, the mind tries to find small mercies. The text talks about the view from the hospital window.
Yes. Let's talk about the window, because you think, well, if I'm stuck in a room for 2 weeks, at least if I have a room with a beautiful view of the city's skyline or a park, it won't be so bad.
Something to look at.
But the psychological observation here is crushing.
The observation is that even the most breathtaking cinematic view from a hospital bed loses its magic almost immediately. The human brain is an adaptation machine. It normalizes its environment incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And the text delivers this striking, somewhat depressing realization: becoming normal is borderline boring.
Becoming normal is borderline boring. I had to read that sentence 3 times. It is such a heavy, true statement about the human condition. We are desperate for novelty and freedom.
We need stimulus.
When your entire universe forcibly shrinks down to the 200 square feet of a hospital room, your brain devours that window view for the first 24 hours. But by day 3, that beautiful park outside is no longer a connection to the world. It is just the static wallpaper of your cage.
It just becomes background noise.
It actually reinforces your confinement because you can see the world moving out there, but you are stuck in here.
It speaks to a very specific type of psychological fatigue. It isn't the acute terror of the operating table. It is a slow, grinding, dulling of the senses. You adapt to the boredom, you adapt to the smell of the sanitizer, you adapt to the absolute lack of control.
You just exist.
And in the midst of this sensory deprivation and loss of autonomy, there is exactly one dynamic, unpredictable human element left in your environment: the nursing staff.
And this introduces perhaps the most complex, tangled psychological web in the entire hospital ecosystem, the dynamic between a helpless patient and the nurses tasked with keeping them alive.
When a human being is stripped of their independence, confined to a bed, dressed in a humiliating gown, and reduced to a state of absolute physical need, there is a natural, almost inevitable psychological regression.
We revert to an infantile state.
Exactly. And in that state, we subconsciously begin searching our environment for maternal or paternal figures who will provide unconditional care and safety.
The source material is remarkably honest about this. The patient admits they intentionally survived this suffocating, terrifying environment by essentially casting the nurses in the role of mother figures.
It's a survival mechanism.
Yeah, they projected that maternal aura onto these medical professionals just to ease their own mind, to find some soft anchor in this hard, sterile place.
It is a profound coping mechanism. But the analysis pushes this even further into territory that is deeply fascinating, if a little uncomfortable to confront.
Oh, this part was wild.
It highlights a common phenomenon where elderly patients, in particular, begin developing genuinely romantic or intensely uncomfortably attached feelings for their nurses.
Okay, why does that happen? Because objectively, the nurse is just doing their job. They're checking an IV and taking a pulse. How does a patient's brain mutate that routine clinical interaction into romance or deep emotional attachment?
There are several powerful psychological forces converging at once. First, we have the mere exposure effect.
Let me make sure I understand that. The mere exposure effect is the idea that just being around something repeatedly makes you like it more, right?
Precisely.
It's like how a pop song on the radio annoys you on Monday, but because it plays every hour, by Friday you are unconsciously humming it in the shower.
Your brain prefers familiarity.
Exactly. Familiarity breeds preference. Now take that baseline psychological quirk and inject it into a high trauma environment. You're terrified, you are in pain, and you are incredibly lonely. Every few hours, the same person walks into your room.
They're a constant.
They are the bringer of pain relief. They are the bringer of food. They are literally keeping you alive. Add to this the element of physical touch, which is incredibly rare in modern society, especially for the elderly. That is a massive point. For an elderly patient who might live entirely alone, who hasn't been hugged or physically touched by another human being in months or even years, suddenly a nurse is gently washing their arm, adjusting their pillows, holding their wrist to check a pulse.
Exactly. When you combine extreme vulnerability, the profound relief of having your suffering alleviated, the mere exposure of their presence and intimate physical touch, you create a potent, almost intoxicating psychological cocktail.
It's overwhelming.
It is entirely natural, almost biologically predetermined, that a lonely patient would misinterpret that highly professional clinical care as deep personal affection. Their brain is starving for connection, and the nurse is providing the closest facsimile available.
It is the ultimate tragedy and contradiction of the human heart in this setting, because on one side of the equation, this emotional nourishment, this illusion of being deeply personally cared for, even if it is a projection, is actually vital for the patient.
It helps them heal.
Yes, feeling loved and safe literally lowers cortisol levels, reduces blood pressure, and aids physical recovery. The illusion works as medicine.
But the text forces us to look at the other side of the ledger. There is a massive, crushing cost to this dynamic, and that cost is paid entirely by the nurses.
Yes, the invisible emotional burden. Nurses are hired and paid to provide clinical care, but because of this psychological regression in patients, the nurses end up carrying the massive emotional weight, the maternal projections, the trauma dumping, and the sometimes wildly inappropriate romantic attachments of a dozen deeply vulnerable people every single day.
It is an unsustainable emotional load. To survive it, to avoid complete psychological burnout within a month, nurses are forced to develop incredibly strong, tough exteriors.
They have to build a wall.
They have to actively compartmentalize. The warmth the patient feels from a nurse might be genuine in the moment, but it has to be strictly bounded by professional necessity. The nurse knows they cannot actually become the mother or the savior or the lover that the patient is desperately projecting onto them.
It fundamentally changes how you view a nurse who might seem a little brusque or grumpy when they walk into the room. They aren't just being mean. That tough exterior is psychological armor.
Exactly, they're protecting themselves.
They are actively protecting their own emotional core from being completely hollowed out and devoured by the bottomless, desperate needs of the patients. If they let every projection in, they would shatter.
It is a remarkable level of empathy required to look past your own suffering in a hospital bed and recognize the invisible, crushing burden the staff is carrying just to keep the lights on.
It really is.
And navigating all of these intense contradictions, hating the cage, loving the nurses, fearing the doctors, leads directly to a massive internal contradiction when it is finally time to be discharged.
This was the moment in the source material that made me stop and reevaluate my own life experiences. Because after everything we just described, after the terror of the blade, the anxiety of the doctor's side, the suffocation of the rigid schedule, the boredom of the window,
When it's over,
when the doctor finally says, "You can go home today," the immediate reaction isn't pure joy.
no, it is deeply conflicted.
The text admits to a genuine, profound reluctance to leave. A weird, lingering emotional attachment to the hospital bed itself. And this reluctance is completely intertwined with the fierce, burning desire to never, ever be hospitalized again.
It perfectly captures the duality of institutionalization. You hate the cage, you chafe against the bars, but over days or weeks your brain has adapted. You have learned how to survive within the cage.
It became your normal.
You know when the meals come. You know the nurse will fix the pain. The hospital has become a zone of guaranteed, albeit restrictive, safety.
And going back out those sliding glass doors means returning to the chaos of the real world. A world where you have to cook your own meals, manage your own schedule, and most terrifyingly, be solely responsible for your own physical safety again.
That's a lot of pressure.
The hospital takes away your autonomy, but it also takes away your responsibility. And giving up that safety net is terrifying, even if you hate the net.
Institutionalization on a microscale. It demonstrates how incredibly adaptable and how easily compromised the human mind is when placed under structural pressure.
Yeah.
But this specific ability to hold two wildly contradictory, opposing feelings at the exact same time, hating the hospital but being terrified to leave it, this cognitive dissonance sets the stage for the final and undoubtedly the most profound philosophical meditation of this entire journey.
This is where we hit the core of it all. We are moving into the recovery phase. The patient is observing other people who are healing or failing to heal. They are watching people in the ward with severe physical impairments, people who have lost limbs or lost mobility permanently, and observing that some of these people act surprisingly cheerful and normal.
And this observation triggers a massive philosophical inquiry. Is the joy these permanently impaired people are exhibiting genuine? Or is it a psychological construct, the final result of them simply accepting a brutally harsh, unchangeable reality?
And this specific train of thought leads to the explosive core argument of this entire text. The author puts forward a thesis that demands our attention. The idea that the act of accepting something and the act of giving up on it are not just related. They are essentially, fundamentally, the exact same thing.
This is a highly provocative claim that strikes at the very heart of how we process grief and loss.
I have to pause and push back on this with everything I have because my brain, and I assume the brain of everyone listening, is screaming that this has to be wrong. This feels inherently incorrect.
Because it completely violates our cultural programming.
Exactly. We are deeply, intensely, socially conditioned from birth to view these two concepts as absolute polar opposites.
Yes, light and dark.
Accepting reality is framed by therapists, by culture, by everyone as a healthy, positive, enlightened step. It is the gold standard of emotional maturity. It is the final stage of the grieving process. You finally reach acceptance and you find peace. But giving up is framed as the ultimate tragic failure. It is seen as weak. It is cowardly. Never give up is the rallying cry of every sports movie, every motivational poster, every cancer battle narrative we've ever consumed. How can anyone possibly claim that reaching enlightened acceptance and weakly giving up are the exact same mechanism?
It feels like a paradox. But when you strip away the emotional judgments we attach to those words and examine the cold logic of human behavior, the argument is remarkably uncomfortably tight.
Okay, lay it out.
To understand it, we have to look specifically at the concept of permanent loss.
Okay, let's walk through the logic.
When something is permanently, irreversibly lost, let's use the example from the hospital. The permanent loss of the function of a leg or the death of a spouse. That loss is an objective physical reality in the universe. It will never return.
Right. It is a fixed point in time. It's done.
To fully and genuinely accept that brutal, unchangeable reality, what must a human mind do? It must completely cease all efforts, both physical and mental, to bring the lost thing back.
It has to stop trying.
It must stop bargaining with God. It must stop pretending the loss isn't real. It must stop fighting the reality.
Okay, I follow that.
Now, look at the literal definition of the phrase giving up. What is it? It is the cessation of effort. It is the act of putting down your sword, acknowledging that the battle is over, and admitting that the outcome is final and you have lost.
Oh, wow.
In the context of a permanent, unfixable loss, fully accepting the reality requires you to give up the fight against it. You must give up the hope that things will magically go back to the way they were yesterday. Therefore, true acceptance is the act of giving up.
Oh, wow. Okay, it's starting to click. But it still feels wrong to call it giving up. It just has such a negative connotation.
Let's use the counterexample provided in the text to prove the thesis. Imagine a patient who has received a terminal diagnosis or a permanent paralysis diagnosis, but this patient is furious.
They're fighting it.
Yes. They are researching experimental trials. They are fighting tooth and nail. They are demanding second opinions. They are refusing to let people pity them. By society's standards, this person hasn't given up, right?
Right. We applaud that. We call that fighting the good fight. They are a warrior.
But follow the logic. Because they are still fighting the diagnosis. Because they are still exerting massive effort to change the outcome. Mathematically and psychologically, they have not yet accepted the loss.
Because if they accepted it, they wouldn't be fighting.
Exactly. Acceptance has not occurred because the war is still raging in their mind. They still believe they can win. Therefore, If there is lingering anger, if there is deep sadness, if there is a desperate burning drive to fix the unfixable, it simply means the mental organization of that loss is not finished.
They haven't given up, which means they haven't accepted it.
This completely rewires the vocabulary of grief. So when we look at someone who is at peace with the tragedy, and we say, wow, they have really accepted their fate, what we are actually witnessing is someone who has successfully, bravely, and peacefully given up on fighting an unwinnable war against the past.
That is heavy. The brilliant move here is stripping away the moral, judgmental weight we attach to the phrase giving up. We view it as a weakness. But the argument is that, in the face of permanent loss, giving up is not a weakness. It is the ultimate necessary concession to reality.
It requires immense strength to lay down your arms and admit you cannot change the universe.
And there is a quote in the source material that acts as the keystone for this whole philosophy. It is profoundly beautiful. The realization that the strength to mourn what is lost and the strength to believe in what you can still do moving forward originate from the exact same place in the human heart.
It is a stunning synthesis of the human experience.
Let's really chew on that quote. The strength to mourn what is lost and the strength to believe in what you can still do originate from the exact same place in the human heart. This means that grief and hope are not enemies.
They're not opposites.
Right. They aren't warring factions inside your brain. They are the exact same raw emotional energy, just pointed in different directions on the timeline.
That's a great way to visualize it.
First, you have to take all that intense energy and direct it backward into the past to mourn. You use it to grieve and ultimately to give up the fight for what is gone. And then, only once you have fully given up, you take that exact same pool of energy, pivot it 180 degrees, and blast it forward into the future to figure out how to navigate the new reality.
Precisely. You cannot use the energy to build a new life if it is entirely tied up in fighting a ghost. You have to recall the troops from the lost war before you can build a new city.
Yes.
And understanding this mechanic, understanding the delicate, crucial transition between fighting and giving up, completely changes how we're supposed to interact with people who are suffering.
Which brings us to a massive, glaring warning in the text. The danger of helpers.
Yes, the dark side of empathy.
The author points out that our traditional knee-jerk ways of comforting people in pain can actually backfire massively and cause deep resentment if we fundamentally misunderstand where that person is on the timeline of accepting versus giving up.
The observation is that if you try to comfort someone who is still actively trying to stand up someone who is still in the fighting the good fight phase, who has absolutely not accepted the loss and is still aggressively trying to fix it, your comfort will register as a deep insult.
How does comfort become an insult? I mean, comfort is supposed to be nice.
Because of what comfort implies. If a patient is trying to walk again and you walk up to them with pity in your eyes, pat their hand and say, "It's okay, you don't have to push yourself, we love you anyway," what is the subtext of that comfort?
The subtext is, I have already accepted that you are crippled. I have given up on you walking, even though you haven't.
Exactly. You are projecting your own acceptance of their loss onto them before they are ready. You are treating them like the fight is already over and they have lost.
And if they're still fighting?
To a person who is still actively fighting, that pity feels like a betrayal. It makes them intensely angry because you are undermining their reality. You are forcing the label of given up onto them while they are still swinging the sword.
That makes so much sense. We think we are being sweet, but we are actually telling them they are defeated.
Right.
But the text doesn't stop there. It goes even deeper into the psychology of the helper themselves, and it gets really, really dark. It highlights a very specific, toxic psychological profile found in some people who eagerly insert themselves into the suffering of others.
We are talking about the savior complex taken to a pathological extreme.
This part of the deep dive gave me chills because we all know someone who flirts with this line. The text talks about people who are literally chemically intoxicated by the act of helping the weak.
And we have to ask why human psychology drives this behavior. It comes down to ego and identity construction. For these individuals, their entire sense of self-worth is predicated on being the strong, benevolent, capable savior.
But to be a savior, by definition, you require a victim.
You can't be a lifeguard if no one is drowning.
Exactly. So they seek out vulnerable people. But the toxic twist is revealed in how they react to rejection. The text describes helpers who get visibly, deeply angry if their help is rejected by the patient.
which is such a weird reaction if your goal is truly to help.
Right. If a patient says, "No thanks, I'm feeling strong today, I want to try walking to the bathroom by myself," the healthy response is, "That's amazing, go for it." But this specific type of toxic helper gets offended. They get angry.
Because the patient's independence is an existential threat to the helper's identity. If the patient can walk to the bathroom alone, the helper is no longer needed. Their role is erased.
They lose their purpose.
It proves that the help was never actually about alleviating the patient's suffering. It was entirely about the helper narcissistically feeding their own need to feel superior and indispensable.
And the analysis pushes this to its absolute most unsettling vampiric conclusion. The suggestion that there are people out there who secretly, subconsciously desire the misfortune of others.
It's the darkest manifestation of this psychology.
The text mentions people who obsess over tragic anniversaries, people who seem inappropriately eager, almost giddy, to insert themselves into someone else's illness or tragedy.
They center themselves.
Yes, they rush to the hospital bed not to comfort the sick person, but to center themselves in the drama of the illness.
Their identity is so inextricably wrapped up in being the strong pillar of support that they subconsciously rely on the continued tragic existence of the weak victim to maintain their own sense of self. Without the tragedy of others, they are nobodies.
It is literal emotional vampirism. They are feeding on the vulnerability of the patient to sustain their own ego. And this chilling psychological profile brings this entire sprawling exploration perfectly full circle. It all comes back to the core theme: vulnerability.
Yes, the inescapable reality of being exposed.
Think about the journey we just took. On the freezing operating table, you are completely physically vulnerable to the tiny sigh of an arrogant Tengu doctor.
You're at their mercy.
In the inpatient bed, you are structurally vulnerable to the suffocating, rigid machinery of the hospital schedule and your own mind's rapid institutionalization.
Trapped in the cage.
And in the emotional recovery phase, you are psychologically vulnerable to the toxic, self-serving motivations of the people who claim they are there to help you.
It forces a mirror up to all of us. It demands that we rigorously question our own motivations when we engage with illness. When we visit a sick friend, are we genuinely helping them find their own strength to navigate their new reality? Or are we subconsciously trying to enforce our own need to be recognized as a savior?
It is an incredibly heavy question to carry. This has been a massive, illuminating, and at times deeply uncomfortable journey. So let's zoom out and synthesize what we've actually uncovered today from this remarkable source material.
We started with the illusion of a trivial medical procedure surgery on a ring finger. But the introduction of local anesthesia acted as a profound psychological catalyst. By stripping away the physical pain but leaving the consciousness intact, it plunged the mind into pure existential vulnerability, exposing the massive, unspoken complexities of medical power dynamics.
We dissected how the absolute asymmetry of power in an operating room turns the tiniest actions aside, a hurried tone into catastrophic anxiety.
Yes, the hypervigilance.
We discussed the controversial yet highly pragmatic survival strategy of lifting up the doctor, managing their ego as a literal medical intervention to ensure your own biological safety within a flawed system.
We explored the suffocating reality of hospital life, the gilded cage, where biological safety comes at the absolute cost of human autonomy. We looked at how that structural confinement breeds complex, sometimes inappropriate emotional attachments, particularly the heavy projections placed upon nurses through the mere exposure effect.
And finally, we dismantled our cultural programming to arrive at the author's ultimate radical realization that letting go, finding peace, and completely giving up might just be the exact same mechanism. That true acceptance in the face of permanent loss requires the immense, terrifying bravery to completely stop fighting a war you have already lost.
The overarching truth revealed here is that hospitals are not just mechanical garages where flesh and bone are repaired. They are highly pressurized, emotionally nuclear arenas where the absolute most fundamental elements of human psychology, our terror of mortality, our desperation for control, the complex mechanics of grief, and the true nature of hope are vividly, inescapably exposed.
So how do we use this? The next time you find yourself forced to navigate a medical situation, or honestly, any situation in life where you are stripped of your power and placed in high vulnerability, I want you to use the strategies we've unpacked today.
Arm yourself.
Exactly. Arm yourself. Do not be a passive passenger in your own life. Use your imagination to play detective with the system you are entering. Understand the immense psychological pressures the staff are under, prepare yourself by knowing your own emotional boundaries, and critically recognize the invisible power dynamics at play in the room.
Because in an environment designed to strip you of your agency, applied knowledge and aggressive self-awareness are your only true defenses against the crushing anxiety of vulnerability.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something to explore in the quiet of your own mind that builds on exactly what we've discovered here. I want you to think about a lingering frustration, a deep sadness, or a conflict in your own life right now. Some situation or perhaps a relationship that you have been struggling with for a long time.
A place in your life where you feel perpetually stuck in the mud.
Yes. Look at that specific struggle and ask yourself this highly uncomfortable question. Are you suffering right now because you think you are trying really, really hard to accept a new reality, when in truth you are just utterly terrified of finally, bravely giving up on the old one?
That's a profound question.
Are you lying wide awake on the cold, sterile operating table of your own mind, staring at the scalpel, refusing to let the surgery happen because you are too scared to admit the old version of you is already gone?
It takes immense, almost unimaginable strength to finally put down the sword and stop fighting the past.
It really does, because sometimes giving up is the only way to actually move forward.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.